All right. Sorry about that. We welcome you all to the LPUA meeting. We, as your representatives in LPUA, welcome your involvement and encourage your participation. This meeting is a public hearing. If you wish to address the LPUA on any item on this agenda, please fill out the request form in the foyer on the computer provided. The electronic request to address the LPUA form must be filled out and submitted prior to the call of the agenda item, or you will not be given an opportunity to speak. If assistance is needed with submitting the request, staff is available to help. In the event a speaker has completed their comments prior to the expiration of the allotted 5 minutes, any remaining time shall be forfeited. If you have materials you wish to submit to the LPUA, please give those to Council Clerk Ms. Veronica L. Williams, seated to my left in the middle. In effort to allow everyone to have an opportunity to be heard, a 5-minute rule will be in effect. Speakers shall refrain from debating, personal attacks, and from making confrontational or derogatory comments. I'm requesting that the front row to my left be used for media only. Mike. Food and drinks are not allowed in the auditorium, and all phone electronic devices shall be silenced from this point forward. I'm also requesting that anyone who approaches the LPUA state their name and title for official record. Meeting procedures are by resolution and not by Robert's Rule order. Documents including agendas, ordinances, and resolutions and minutes related to this and other meetings are posted online at www.lafayette.la.gov or referred to the web address at the top of the agenda. Chair announcements. I only have one item. Item number 6, ordinance number 007-2018 LPUA relative to the IGA with SLCC, LUS, and legal have proposed an amendment to include the backup Exhibit A and to add language to the IGA in Section 2 of the ordinance requiring the approval of council and LPUA prior to any contributions in subsequent years. I have no chair announcements. Do I have any LPUA announcements? Anyone? No? Mayor, would you have any announcements? All right, hold on, let me get to you. All yours, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, or Chairwoman, I apologize. I'd like to bring up Mr. Terry Huval to introduce someone to get some facts out on an issue that has recently been in the public, and so I'll turn it over to Terry to make the introduction. Thank you.
Sure, and Terry, all mics are on, so if everybody wants to spread out, they're welcome to.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Terry Huval, the Director of Utilities, and several weeks ago there was some discussion about the Chico Aquifer and the water quality and the water safety in the city of Lafayette. And I had commented at that time there's a number of cities that actually get their water directly out of a flowing river, like the Mississippi River, and are able to clean it to a point and treat it to a point to where it's safe for the public. We have the good fortune in this area of having a very well-protected aquifer, the Chico Aquifer, that provides for our water source here. And to be able to provide you a little bit more depth on that issue, because I know there's been a lot of discussion, comments made about the aquifer, I asked Bill Neef, who is a civil engineer in this area, has been here for a long time, and has studied, the Chico Aquifer. It's been an interesting thing to him through the years. And so I asked him to come and kind of share with you a short presentation. It's not going to be very long, but just to give you a perspective so that we take the words of the Chico Aquifer and put it into what the reality of that is. So, Mr. Neef.
As you said, my name is Bill Neef, and we will call this a Chico primer. It's going to be very basic, very kind of quick information. This is actually kind of a two-part presentation. No part of it is what I had prepared on the aquifer, but I also met a little bit with Tracy Mouton, the environmental manager at LUS, and some of the information was kind of gathered from her. She's out of town, which is the reason she couldn't be here to present this, but we'll kind of move with it real quick. Basically, there are two types of aquifers. There's called an unconfined aquifer and a confined aquifer. An unconfined aquifer is essentially defined as areas where rainwater that hits the ground can just go directly down into the ground, and that's what refills the aquifer. We don't have that around here. There might be places in Arizona where it's desert and it's sand all the way up to the surface. What we have here is what's called a confined aquifer, which means that there's a There's an upper surface to the ground that protects the aquifer below it. There's a lower clay or rock below that. And in between is sand and gravel that would allow water to flow through it. And that's what the aquifer actually is it's that geological structure. So the question then becomes, well, how does that aquifer get water into it? Well, there are areas where that sand and gravel that moves underground will actually come up to the surface. We call that an outcrop. So where that sand and gravel gets to the surface is the primary recharge. We pull water out of the aquifer every day, we have to replace it. Those are the areas where it gets replaced. Now that clay layer that exists above it, it's not a perfect seal to the aquifer, but it is highly protective of it. And on this slide, what we're showing is USGS has done a lot of studies, obviously, of the Chico aquifer. And it's extremely important to South and Southwest Louisiana because it's considered to be a sole source aquifer, meaning that all or almost all water used for all purposes, agriculture, in business that needs water, residential, that's where the water comes from, is out of the Chico aquifer. It covers about 9,000 square miles. And if you notice on this drawing, it shows where the recharge areas actually are. The recharge areas are in about 3 parishes up around Alexandria. That's where most of the water gets down into the Chico aquifer and then filters down here so that it can be pulled up out of the ground. Another area where they get recharged is the Atchafalaya Basin. There'll be water coming out of the basin that recharges also. In Lafayette Parish, and again, this is based on some information from the U.S. Geological Survey, the depth of the aquifer goes down to about 900 feet. Below that is actually not where that clay layer is. That's where there's a saltwater aquifer existing below it called the Evangeline Aquifer. That area is actually recharged from the Gulf of Mexico. That's where that outcrop is that allows that salt water to come in. It stays below the fresh water. The salt water is heavier. The upper unit, the protective layer that we would call it, it varies in thickness in Lafayette Parish, anywhere from about 40 feet thick. On the western side, in some places, is 120 foot thick. You can find water, though, inside of that clay layer that is not necessarily what I would consider to be aquifer water. We go out there today with all the rain that we've had this winter, we can go drill a hole 3 feet deep, we might find water. We call that perched water. There are areas that'll hold some water up at the surface, but you can't produce the water from there. So it's not part of the drinking water. There are other areas that inside of that clay, there are small areas of sand that can allow water to get into that, and it would be producible on a small level. If you could get into that sand, maybe you could provide water to a house. Most of the water, though, comes from the Chico aquifer, and at the North Water Plant, which is one of the major plants, the wells are screened, which is the level that they actually pull the water out of the aquifer. They're screened at about 600 feet. And the aquifer is talked about the Chico aquifer is talked about in 2 layers, the upper sand and the lower sand. For the North Water Plant, every well is screened in the lower sand of the Chico aquifer. For the South Water Plant, which is over off of Dogdouillon, all of those are screened in the upper sand. Mostly that's just because when the test wells were drilled, that's where they found the best quality water and to be able to produce the volume that LUS would need to be able to provide into the plants. This is the information in my discussions with Tracy with LUS. There are 4 water plants that service the city of Lafayette and then the wholesale customers that LUS sells to. You have the North Water Plant on Buchanan. That is served by, there are 9 wells available to provide water to that plant, but only 4 of them are necessary for daily use. There's 5 additional. The South Plant has 7. They only need 3 for everyday use. The Gloria Switch, which is a satellite plant, it's a very small plant, has 2 wells. They only need 1 for daily use. And Commission Boulevard has 2 wells. They only need 1 there. So you've got some backup wells at each one of the plants. A few of the backup measures, you know, if all you had was 6 wells and that's what you needed, and there are any number of reasons you might have to take a well out of service. Pump could go bad, motor could burn, whatever. So you've got redundancy with the wells, where if something goes wrong with one of them, you got another one you can go turn on, so you're not losing your capacity. The other thing the water plants have, which is a primary concern around here, is if a hurricane comes through and knocks the primary power out, each one of the water plants has sufficient generating capacity to run the plant. So main power can go off, and the generators are there to run the plant. So LUS can continue to provide the water. The water monitoring, it begins from the wells themselves. And remember, that's not the water that is provided into the distribution system. That's prior to any kind of treatment. That's where the most rigorous analysis is done. DHH comes through every few years. They collect samples. They do the very long laundry list of different parameters. When the water comes up out of the wells and is in the plant, they're taking samples in the process to make sure that the treatment process is working appropriately. Once it leaves the plant, there are samples that are collected from the distribution system. Some samples are collected every day. There are other samples that might have to be collected once a month. Some other samples are collected once a quarter. There are some samples, like for lead and copper, I think they're done once a year. So it's an ongoing process of making certain that the water is being provided is safe. And that's the last bullet item on here is for lead and copper. We've all heard about the Flint, Michigan problem, and the reason for their problem was corrosion of service lines once it gets beyond the meter. And LUS actually goes into homes and collects samples, I think it's from 50 houses every year, to make sure that the water is not reacting with materials that the plumbing in the home was built with, to ensure that lead and copper is not creating a problem. And the Safe Drinking Water Act has what they call primary standards, secondary standards. The primary standards are those arsenic, lead, pesticides, those organic chemicals that nobody can pronounce. That's that list. And LUS has never had a violation of any Safe Drinking Water Act primary standard ever. That's the end of my presentation.
That's all.
All right, thank you very much. Should I go with questions for you guys for the speaker?
Yeah, I have.
Do you have a question? All right.
Yeah, back, I think. What you want to do is just put him back on because you got all mics on.
Okay.
Just let him.
Want to go ahead, Pat?
Yes. Sir,
Wanna-
well, I have a question.
We can bring our speaker back up?
Yeah, please. You say the aquifer is what, 900 foot deep? About?
Roughly. It'd be about, but it's 900 feet deep, and then you get to salt water.
How
So there's
did it
still
get-
water below it.
How did it get there? I mean, what makes it just nature?
Banks.
How did it get there? Just nature, that's how it became 900 feet deep?
Essentially,
Essentially.
because it's, again, we have to remember that an aquifer is not the water that's in it. An aquifer is, there's a geologic structure that allows water to flow through it. And geologic structures exist from nature and years of,
Right.
of change, and that's what it's from. And just like where it comes out
Right.
in those areas up around Alexandria, that's just the way nature made it.
You said someone goes out and periodically monitor it. You said LDH, I believe? Who is
There are
that?
some samples that are collected by DHH, and DHH does the analysis. There are some samples that LUS collects and analyzes in its own certified lab.
Do you know about how deep they go to test it? To monitor how deep? If it's 900 foot, do they go, what, 200?
Well,
100?
those samples are collected by DHH that are collected from the well, and the water is however deep that well is.
However deep.
So if it's at the North Plant where the wells are 500, 600 feet deep, when they take a sample from that well, they're taking it from a tap
Okay.
right at the well, but the water's coming up from 600 feet deep. If they go to the South Plant and do the same thing, those wells are 200 to 250 feet deep. So when they collect that sample, that's the depth they're collecting it from.
All right, thank you.
Any other?
Nanette, did you have anything? No, sir, that's all we have. Thank you.
Right.
That's all you had, Mayor? All right, thank you, Mayor. Now we'll take comments from the public on matters related to LUS. V, do we have any? Yes, ma'am. All right. This portion of our meeting is an opportunity to make your voice heard before the LPUA, the administration, and the public. This is the time to speak to LUS topics that are not included on the agenda items. Please, as we request all matters regarding specific LUS employees be directed to the administration and that it not be addressed at this public forum. We, as the LPUA, have a concern for privacy and protection of government employees. With that said, however, if your concern is not resolved in either a satisfactory fashion, there are other avenues which can be pursued, and we ask you to follow up with the council office. Also, confrontational statements or threats will not be tolerated. We ask that you conduct yourself in a civil manner and with the same courtesy you would respect of others. The 5-minute rule does apply. B?
The first of 2 speakers, Kim Goodale.
You're going to pass? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay. All right, so you're passing. All right. V, next one.
Final speaker, Dr. Michael Walden.
All right. Both podiums are yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you for taking my comments. My name is Michael Walden. I'm a PhD, retired environmental engineer, and I've worked as a hydrologist and now do a little bit of consulting, but primarily I'm retired. I wanted to speak to you today about the topics of the letter that was sent to the council, the full council, and the mayor president over a year ago now, that concerned the rail yard and the contamination of the aquifer. I think there is misunderstanding of what we were saying. And also I think there are just some plain misunderstandings. I have never said that the water coming out of your tap in your house in Lafayette, coming from LUS, is unhealthful. I drink it, my kids drank it most of the time they grew up. A city the size of Lafayette should always be able to find the capital to be able to treat the water that they serve out to the public. It's usually small communities that have real water quality problems with their drinking water. Flint was a great anomaly. Now, the problem we have is that the rail yard is very, very heavily contaminated. For years we were told there's a clay layer underneath the rail yard that's going to stop any contamination from going into the aquifer. We know now that that really wasn't true. There's clear evidence from the USGS, from many sources. Just this last week there was a news conference held by Bill Goodell, who's the lead attorney for the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against the railroad by the Salvation Army and others, that said, look, back in the 1990s, a report was given to DEQ that showed that there's contamination in the aquifer. Clearly, there's not a clay layer that's magically keeping that material from going down into the aquifer, which is our drinking water source. Later, the USGS did a report in the early 2000s that clearly said, you've got to re-examine this hypothesis that this clay layer is protective, because it's clearly not. There are too many data points that show it's not. Multiple lines of evidence show that that just isn't the case. So what is the problem? I'm confident that Lafayette we could go to reverse osmosis. You know, cities do that don't have any other choice if we had to. The problem is the ratepayers are going to be suffering this cost. Now, right now, the contaminant levels at our wells that are measured are at trace levels. They're what's called detectable. They're not up at the levels that cause human health problems. But the fact that they're getting there means there's more coming. You know, we're seeing the camel's nose getting in the tent. You know, there's contaminants coming from the rail yard down towards our wells, and we're pumping 10 million gallons a day. So we have two problems. First, we may have to abandon those wells or go to some advanced form of treatment because of the contamination that gets to our wells. And that may be sometime in the future because it looks like the contaminants are moving this way. Second, when the rail yard is remediated, and we hope that'll be by the Union Pacific Railroad and not by the taxpayers, when that rail yard is remediated, there will probably be recovery wells put in that will try to stop the outward migration of those contaminants and pull them back in. Usually recovery wells operate for decades to do this. So you pull the water in and you treat it, and then you either discharge it to the surface water or you inject it into a very deep aquifer that will never be used for drinking. So when they start remediating, it may really be incompatible with that to continue pumping 10 million gallons a day at the North Plant. We may have to find an alternative water source at that time. Now, I don't know when they're going to start remediating. Most places have already begun all around the country. But when they do, we need to look at the fact that our ratepayers may have a cost which should be passed on to the responsible party.
That's it. All right, thank you very much. Moving on to resolutions. This is a public hearing. An electronic sign is available for anyone wishing to address the LPUA. The 5-minute rule does apply. Jeremy, would you please read?
4, 2018 LPUA, a resolution of the Lafayette Public Utilities Authority informing the State of Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality that the Lafayette Utility System has taken the appropriate action concerning permit requirements contained in LPDES permits numbered LA 36382, LA 36374, LA 36391, and LA 42561.
Can I get a motion in a second? So moved by Boudreaux, second by Cook. LPUA discussion? I don't see any. Do we have any public comment on this?
No, ma'am, we do not. And white binders are related to this item.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's call for a vote, please.
District 3? District 4?
Yes.
District 6?
Yes.
District 7?
Yes.
District 8?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Moving on to ordinance for final adoption. Jeremy, will you please read?
Ordinance 7, 2018 LPUA, an ordinance of the Lafayette Public Utilities Authority authorizing and directing the Lafayette Mayor President to execute an intergovernmental agreement with South Louisiana Community College for the establishment of an electric lineman training course.
So moved by who did it? Conk. Second by Boudreaux. Boudreaux offers the amendment and Conk seconds it. Council discussion on the amendment? Nope. Do we have public comment? Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Mr. Boudreaux, the floor is yours. Oh. Okay.
Thank you. Terry, first of all, I want to thank you for the UN legal for the changes that was made. It addressed most of my concerns that I had with this agreement. I want to say that I support, obviously, the department. I support SLCC. I understand what we are doing here with the historical nature of some of the budgetary challenges we've had as it relates to being able to maintain linemen. My concern when this was first brought forward was the likelihood that we would capture them, and I guess we're just going to remain optimistic on that. Another discovery that was made when this first came up was that this wasn't just LUS and SLCC, that all of the local providers were participating. So as it relates to my discussion, I want to Exhibit A, the 9 of 9 page, which is the material listing. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what we're doing here, because it was said that all service providers were contributing at the equal level. And I was looking at some of these quantities, and I think there's 3 providers participating, if I'm correct, ourselves, Cinemco and Clico. And when I see things like utility poles and we're providing 32, and if everybody's equally, that's like, for training purposes, of course. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding and it's accurately acknowledged that all the providers is going to be doing what we're doing.
Yes, sir. In fact, what I'd like to do is, Greg Labe is our manager of our electric operations group, and he's been the guy at the table, going through this. So I'm going to invite him to come up and kind of explain why the quantity is here, so we can, get that ferreted out.
Greg Labe, Electric Operations Manager. Yes, that's the total for the yard. That's just an example of the types of material we would all be donating. So everybody would have a third right now. Right. And we are looking at bringing in another interested partner with that. Yeah. So that's why we put a price on it, so we can use that to, for a guideline.
Right. Okay. So and again, so in the case of, I'm gonna just pull the 40-foot utility poles. We're doing 32. If 4 people doing, you're gonna have 120 utility poles for training.
No, that would be divided by 3.
Okay.
That's just a sample of the yard that's gonna be built.
So this is the whole yard?
Yes, sir.
So our obligation is gonna be 10 poles?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Are we fronting and everybody's going to be replenishing our material, or because to me this list becomes a little misleading because it's in our packet. When I see SLCC training ground materials as part of our ordinance, it seems like we're providing it. Right. So, look, I'm going to trust, I know you all going to protect our money, right? But that was my concern, is that everybody is participating equally, especially when we don't have an absolute yet on how we're going to benefit, because our alignment issue was related. I guess there was a shortage of qualified providers, but it was more so budgetary. We lose linemen because other companies were paying better, is how we looked at this during the budget. So it's like, if we can't keep up with the pay, we're not going to get, I don't see how we get linemen if it's a pay issue versus a training issue.
This will create a bigger pool for us to pull from, because not only is it a pay problem, it's attracting young people to want to do this career. So that's another problem we have. And it's 2 parts to the problem. And
so, Paul, Mike, the exhibit that I'm looking at, is it okay to remain in that fashion, although we're not obligated to this entire presentation here?
yes.
If just from a legal perspective, I just want an opinion on that. It's exhibit 9 of 9 in the red line version. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to read you the language from the agreement, because
Can you identify yourself?
Sure. Michael Hebert, Assistant City Parish Attorney. The agreement itself, one of the amendments says, a list of materials anticipated by the parties, as well as being necessary, convenient, or desirable to establish the course, along with the estimated cost of such materials, is attached here to as Exhibit A and made a part hereof by reference. And that language is on purpose to say it's not just LCG, it's all the materials anticipated by the parties. And I don't know, I'm not speaking for Terry and Greg, but this agreement, as long as the contributions are proportionate, we might furnish more than 1/4 of the poles, but we might furnish less of something else, so long as the contributions all work out monetarily to be proportionate.
Right. So, in my final question, well, maybe Greg, the $100,000 budgetary or cash identification, that is separate and aside from the material list, or that is?
No, that's included.
So in other
That's-
words, our materials that we're obligating ourselves to cannot exceed the $100,000
That's correct, and that includes labor in kind also.
labor and in-kind. Okay. Again, I thank y'all for these amendments in addressing the concerns that was expressed at the first meeting, and I'm going to certainly support it. Just, you know, for reference purposes, and this is throughout our government, our intergovernmental agreements, we just need to make sure that we're not carrying the bag. And I thank y'all for that. And I think y'all cleared up a lot with this. So again, thank you very much. That's all I have.
Yeah, can I make a comment real quick? And don't want to belabor it, but one of the things I checked into also is what's our record on hanging on to linemen. We've got 39 positions total, of which 10 are vacant. So basically, we've got 25% of our positions that are vacant. And if I'd like to say it was just us, but the other companies are having the same problem. As Greg said, the issue is trying to attract people to do this by the SLCC being involved in it. There's a low-cost way, a much better, much more cost-effective way for them to be able to provide that training and make those people prepared to build a workforce, and that way we don't lose, you know, a year and a half, 2 years of training them ourselves because they're already trained coming in. So hopefully it becomes kind of a win-win for both parties. It's a, you know, we've tried everything else. We figured this is a way to go with it, and I appreciate the concern from a fiduciary perspective as to what we need to be doing here. We're going to watch it closely.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate that. Do we have any public comment on the amendment?
No, ma'am.
All right, let's call for a vote, please, on the amendment.
District 4?
Yes.
District 6?
Yes.
District 7?
Yes.
District 8?
Yes.
District 3? Motion to amend is approved.
Okay, moving on to council discussion as amended. Yeah. Yeah, as amended. No, no discussion? No? Public comment? All right, let's call for a vote to adopt the ordinance as amended.
District 4?
Yes.
District 6?
Yes.
District 7?
Yes.
District 8?
Yes.
District 3? Motion to adopt as amended is approved.
All right, moving on to introductory ordinance. Jeremy, would you please read?
Ordinance 8, 2018, LPUA, an ordinance of the Lafayette Public Utilities Authority providing for the abandonment of a 10-foot electrical easement on Lot 3A of Howard's having a municipal address of 4603 Johnson Street.
So moved by Boudreaux, second by Cook. Do we have comments from the public for this item? LPUA discussion? No? All right, let's call for a vote.
District 6?
Yes.
District 7?
Yes.
District 8?
Yes.
District 3? District 4?
Yes.
Motion to introduce is approved.
All right, next up, director's update. Terry, did you have anything else you wanted to add? No, sir? No, sir? Okay, well then, this meeting is adjourned.
Terry.